Welcome everyone to Palo Alto Networks certifications, the definitive PCNSA and PCNSE study guide. What I want to take a look at in this session is to make a quick overview of Palo Alto Networks certifications, where we will focus in particular on PCNSA and PCNSE. And then we will take a look at the exam information. I'm going to discuss the exam format. I'm going to tell you how long the exam is going to last. I'm going to explain certification policy. Then most of the time we will spend looking at the different tools and resources you guys can use when you study to these certifications. And at the end, we will also quickly take a look at some dedicated training for PCNSA and PCNSE. Palo Alto Networks offers a bunch of different certification programs that are generally meant to help you learn the different features, technologies, and concepts related to their products. In particular, what we will look at this time is going to be the PCNSA, Palo Alto Networks Certified Network Security Administrator certification, and then Palo Alto Networks Certified Network Security Engineer, which both are the most commonly taken and recognized Palo Alto Networks certifications. The difference between these, the main difference, is that PCNSA, this is more of like an intermediate level certification, where the goal is going to be to teach you to operate a Palo Alto Networks firewall. So kind of like the assumption is that the firewall is here and you are supposed to deal with more of like maintenance jobs, with the administration of policies, stuff like that, versus PCNSE, a more complex, advanced level certification. And this one is meant to teach you and test your skills on configuration and deployment of Palo Alto Networks firewalls. In this case, the assumption is that you will be able to configure and deploy a PenOS device from scratch, configure all of the different settings, and then also obviously manage the firewall, control the policy, change rules to make the firewall work as required. Some other certifications that Palo Alto Networks offer include PCSAE, PCDRA, PCCET. These will eventually make you a Palo Alto Networks certified as security automation engineer, detection and remediation analyst, and cybersecurity entry-level technician, respectively. But as I said, the focus in this session is going to be on the PCNSA and PCNSE certifications because of their prevalence and because of their industry recognition. We will now talk about exam information and take a look at the exam format for all of these different Palo Alto Networks certifications. First off, I want to mention that these exams are question-based, which means that you will be given a specific set of questions, and the questions can be of different type. And at the end of the day, what's going to matter is if you get an appropriate number of points. You need to, in order to pass the exam, you will have to pass a certain thresholds based on the amount of questions that you answered correctly. Now, the different types of questions we've got here, we've got multiple choice, which is a simple type of a question when you are given several answers and only one of them is correct. So there's going to be just one answer that is valid for the question, versus with multiple answer questions, you could possibly see more than one correct answer. They will typically tell you how many questions, how many answers are correct. So that's a good thing about it. Like if they tell you there are 3 answers that are correct, it means that you need to check 3 answers, ideally the correct ones, obviously. And then the last type is drag and drop, which is when they give you several answers in a form of boxes with some text, or maybe images, or maybe configuration outputs. And the goal is going to be to put these all together, but in the correct order. So it's all about to reorder these so that the content of the answers of those drag and drop boxes makes sense. So it is just the questions. In this case, there is no hands-on configuration scenarios when they tell you that you should configure a firewall to the X, Y, or Z, and they give you access to real equipment or virtualized equipment. You will not see that type of simulations in case of PCNSA or PCNSE tests. This simplifies a lot. In terms of a number of questions you will see for the exams, it's going to be something between 60 and 75 for PCNSA versus from 70 to 80 questions for PCNSE. You will be given 90 minutes to solve the test, to answer all of the questions, but notice that this 90 minutes also includes 10 minutes for non-exam activities, which specifically means 5 minutes to review the exam policy when you start the test, and then the 5 minutes at the end to take the survey. So it's, in reality, for the exam itself, you've got like 80 minutes to answer all of the questions. So it gives you roughly a minute per question, which should be sufficient if you know your stuff. The exam is hosted by Pearson VUE, and the current price for PCNSA is $155 versus we've got $175 for PCNSE. So the difference in price is not really, I would say, important, but the difference in the content is gonna be significant. So PCNSE, as I said, is gonna be a much harder exam comparing to PCNSA. Also notice that Palo Alto Networks certifications, including PCNSA and PCNSE, are valid for 2 years, which means that if you want to keep your certification status as active, you will have to take that test every 2 years. When you take the test every 2 years and pass the exam, you will automatically become pre-certified for PCNSA or PCNSE. A quick reminder, you guys don't forget to subscribe to our website's newsletter and YouTube channel for the latest updates on products, industry news, and promotions. Thanks. Of course, the most important thing to know for any type of certification studies is going to be your weapons, or just tools and resources that you will be able to use as you prepare to take the test. In case of Palo Alto Networks, we've got, I would start with study guides, because this is something that Palo Alto Networks gives you for free, the same as the documentation. Let's take a look at study guides to start. If you go to the main education website on paloaltonetworks.com, you can then scroll down to network security, and you will be able to open web pages for PCNSA and PCNSE. They look very similar. Obviously, content is different, but what's going to be important for us is going to be exam resources. First, they give you a description for what's included, general information about the test. Then they give you a blueprint, which is a specific detailed checklist of the topics you are supposed to know to pass the test. So this is where they tell you what they will test you on. Like in case of PCNSA, we've got several domains. Main one is device management and services, which is stuff like management, interfaces, access to the firewall, local administrators, firewall configuration maintenance, policy updates, and panorama management, interface types, firewall interfaces, stuff like that. Then we've got managing objects, which is all about objects related to our policies, which is domain free. Security policy, also identification engines, basic NAT policies, troubleshooting verification for policies. Then we've got traffic security, which is security profiles, other or just advanced inspection engines, URL filtering, and some other topics. This is PCNSA. Now, if you take a look at PCNSE, we've got core concepts, configure core components, configure features and subscriptions, configure firewalls using Panorama, manage and operate, and troubleshooting. But the key thing is that PCNSA, in reality, it builds on top of the PCNSA certification. We will take a look at these topics in just a second, but you will notice that most of them overlap with the PCNSA certification, and PCNSE basically adds on top of a PCNSA with additional topics and features. So I would say that in order to pass PCNSE or just take the PCNSE exam, ideally you want to be at least at the PCNSA level, or just to make a PCNSA, you could make a PCNSA your personal prerequisite, because technically there is no prerequisites to take either of the exams. But since you need to know the PCNSA topics for PCNSE, it probably makes sense to start with PCNSA if you don't have any previous Palo Alto Networks experience. We've got core concepts here with firewall components, security components, interface types, identification engines, then deployment, security profiles, so inspection engines, some attack mitigation tools, then authentication, authorization, device access, routing NAT, service routes, VPNs, identification engines in detail, some advanced technologies like Wildfire, and then Panorama config, management and operations, including logging, including high availability, and virtual private networks, as some are here, and finally troubleshooting. So PCNSE, as you can tell, definitely adds content on top of PCNSA. We go back to the education pages for PCNSA and PCNSE. We also have study guide and sample questions. Study guide for PCNSA is less than 100 pages long, versus if you take a look at study guide for PCNSE, we've got we've got a little bit over 200 pages. So this on its own tells you about the scope of those different certifications. Now, an additional note on study guides. When you take a look at these documents, you will quickly notice that there is a lot of content taken directly from the documentation, what they put to these books. So for those of you who are familiar with the documentation and know the documentation really well, using study guides is probably it's probably going to be a waste of time, because most of the topics, most of the content is going to be especially the same, comparing it to the documentation. Documentation is another great free resource you could use. We've got documents for next generation firewall. This is where I would start. Just make sure you select the right version for each of the documents. We've got getting started, administration, networking, AI ops, incidents and alerts. Getting started is what you will use to quickly kick off with the firewall installation, and then administration, getting started, similar stuff. basics like how to set up security policy, interfaces, stuff like that. And then we've got subscriptions, which is going to be important for licensing and updates, firewall administration, telemetry, authentication, high availability, monitoring, including logging, identification engines, policies, attack mitigation tools, certificate management. The networking is all about routing and routing protocols and methods available on PAN-OS, including route redistribution and including multicasts. It's also a place where you will learn about some services available on a PAN-OS and network address translation. That's another big one for networking. Just don't forget to select the right version that matches the operating system of your device. Okay, then we've got AI Ops, which is how you could use AI to take a look at the health of the system, give you some recommendations on the config, check the health, basically use AI as an additional tool that will kind of like analyze the config of your firewall. And the last one here is going to be the alerts. Now, there is also, if you take a look at the products, there's also going to be another bunch of documents what you will want to look at least for the PCNSE, because virtual private networks are part of the PCNSE certification. You could also gather from products and just click on network security. You've got IPsec VPN administration, so this is going to be for site-to-site with IPsec. This one also gives you a little bit more information about security policy administration. And one other place is going to be when you go to products and next generation firewall, excuse me, not next generation firewall, Global Protect. This is for remote access VPNs with PAN-OS when you use deploy Global Protect. And there is also one other next generation firewall for SD-WAN, or you could also take a look at service provider, a document if that's going to be what you need for your work, because this is outside the scope of the certifications, PCNSA or PCNSE. The stuff I'm showing you here is what you will want to use for PCNSA and PCNSE. There is also one more, I would call it something that's not really required, but good, especially for real work and for day-to-day operations and maintenance of Palo Alto Networks firewall systems, which is gonna be the best practices. Let's take a look at, let's go down to network security once again. Okay, I believe that if we go to products and just click on next generation firewall, it might be here. Best practices. Right, so you could also access this stuff from best practices main menu. You've got a bunch of other documents that Palo Alto Networks engineers prepared to tell you about the best practices and recommended approach for deploying, configuring, and maintaining certain features, like for instance, DOS and zone protection, like administrative access best practices, like security policy best practices, which is where they give you hints about the right approach for configuring and managing a given part of the system. They they give you some tips about best practices for deploying, configuring different elements of the firewall. So really good place to learn much more than just how to configure, how to enable a given feature. This stuff is more work related, and it can quickly help you to better understand real world deployments, real world scenarios, and real world configurations related to PAN-OS. Really good place to look at, especially when you're done with PCNSA and PCNSE exams. In terms of other tools, there is one book I can definitely recommend, which is Mastering Palo Alto Networks, build, configure, and deploy network solutions for your infrastructure using features of PAN-OS. This is something you can easily Google. I would just say mastering Palo Alto Networks, and just make sure that you choose the latest version. This is by Tom Pians. Hopefully I pronounced this name of the author correctly. The last one is from, okay, this is 2020, so this is the old version. What you want to look at is going to be the second edition. Build, configure, and deploy network solutions for your infrastructure using features of PAN-OS, Tom Pians, and mastering Palo Alto Networks. This is a really good read. The author gets you through pretty much everything you need for PCNSA, PCNSE, and a lot more. From understanding the core technologies, setting up new devices, building policies, controlling the sessions, configuring modes, using the ID engines, panorama management and administration, logging, reporting, VPNs, advanced protection, troubleshooting. A really good choice for someone who is really serious about mastering Palo Alto Networks firewall systems. In terms of hands-on experience and the hands-on portion of the exam preparations, which is obviously something that in fact is really important for anyone who is studying to PCNSA, PCNSE in particular, and I would say obviously for someone who wants to work with PAN-OS, this is going to be one of the critical pieces that you guys want to include in your studies. Probably the easiest way, unless you have access to real network environment with Palo Alto Network firewalls, like at work. Maybe you've got a lab environment at your work, and you can use that. But if you don't have access to any particular network with PAN-OS, I would go ahead and recommend EVENG. EVENG is also what we use here at Cybrec to build and configure our different topologies to create the various practice labs, scenarios, and also this is something that I use when I create courses, when I teach you how to use the different features and technologies for demonstrations. And EVENG is a multi-vendor network emulation software that you could use to easily build your simple home lab, like even on a laptop that you could take as you go when you leave your home. You want to study from a different place. A simple laptop is going to do the trick for small topologies. The main problem with EVE is that the more devices you add and the more complex the devices are, the more resources you'll have to allocate for the environment. I'm talking about virtual CPUs and RAM, the memory. So for larger topologies, you'll have to buy a server or something close to a server with at least 100 gigs of RAM and 16 to 48 CPUs or just cores. So that might be somewhat expensive, plus it will give you a lot of temperature. It's going to bump up the temperature and it's going to give you some noise in the room. So for those of you who don't really want to invest at an appliance, a server like that, you could also quickly find some rented or just cloud-based pre-built EVENG environments and use this for your studies. Now, EVENG itself, so the software, the virtual application, the virtual network, is available in 3 versions. We've got the community version, professional version, and a version for learning centers. Now, community version is free, and this is what's going to do the trick for most of you. If you want to build simple, small to medium labs, community version is a way to go. Now, professional, which is now 150 euros per year, it gives you additional features like lab timers, like uh, running labs folder. They give you the ability to use up to 1024 nodes versus 63. But 63 nodes is definitely sufficient for the small to medium environments. It also gives you some additional enhancements, like you could use a local VNC or Telnet client. Wireshark is integrated. They support Dockers. They allow you to share the labs and projects. They add some additional features like the ability to introduce delay packet loss in the network, a better text editor, a much more customizable options, advanced design stuff. But for the underlying engine, the emulation engine, it's gonna work the same when you use community versus professional, which means that you can run a PanOS on either of this, of this EVENG versions. It doesn't really matter if you run it on community versus professional, because at the end of the day, it's gonna run the same. So it's up to you if you want to spend this 150 per year to get those little perks and bonuses, versus if you just want to get the simplest environment for free that will still allow you to run all those different images, including Palo Alto Networks firewall and Panorama. Now, before we finish, let me also quickly get you through our learning programs here at Cybrec, which are all end-to-end for PCNSA and PCNSE certifications. These programs, video solutions, paths of video solutions, are self-paced, which means that you can watch them whenever you have time for that. You can stop the video, get back to it later, rewatch a certain portion, and so on. This is all end-to-end stuff, so we will get you from the beginning to the end. We will always start with theory and concepts related to a given technology to give you some background on it, tell you why it is used for, what kind of problems it is supposed to solve, how does it work, and then how to use it through the different hands-on demonstrations, instructor-led demonstrations, to finally give you access to technology and possibly also advanced lab workbooks, which is what you can use to practice on your own. Both of these workbooks, they come with a set of video solutions, which means that you will be able to quickly verify if what you did on the device really meets the requirements of a given workbook. Now, technology labs is something that is associated with pretty much every single course, versus advanced labs. This is a complex lab with multi-protocol and technology challenges. In this particular case, this workbook is going to apply to PCNSE learning program. Let's take a look at this at cybrec.com. From the main website, you guys can go down to Learn and choose certifications. Then you can take a look at both learning programs. PCNSA, this one is only made of free video courses, starting with Palo Alto Networks Firewall, and then Palo Alto Networks Firewall Traffic Control and Advanced Traffic Control. So you can take a look at each of them to quickly figure out the details, the summary of the course, and then the information about the content. Now, if you take a look at PCNSE, this one is a longer program because at the time of making this recording, it has 6 video courses from starting with Palo Alto Networks Firewall down to best practices and design, administrative access, and also troubleshooting Palo Alto Networks firewalls. Plus, this one also includes advanced practice labs, which is a full-scale lab that is made of individual tasks that will test your knowledge of the different aspects of PanOS. That's pretty much it what I had this time. Thank you everyone for joining. You guys don't forget to subscribe to our website's newsletter and YouTube channel. Keep up with your studies, and until the next time.